Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'm going to go over a couple videos, maybe two or three videos, dealing with current events. I want to do one that's taking the perspective of Steve Bannon, and I want to take a look at another video on the perspectives of John Bolton. Might also play the perspectives of this concept called Cold War II by Neil Ferguson. So let's begin with Bannon. But before we do, please make sure you subscribe to all my channels. I have 3 channels on YouTube. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. Links are in the description of this video and all my videos. Also, the links are up on that are pinned on X. Please also follow me on X and GETTR. That way you'll get announcements, some links to research papers, some products that I'm offering, so you get updated on everything that I do. So make sure that you subscribe to those social media platforms and for my channel. And also please follow me on all 6 of my channels. I am heavily censored on YouTube, so there's certain videos that I cannot keep up on YouTube. The safe harbors are Rumble, Bitchute, and Brighteon. Please subscribe to all 6 channels. So let's begin with Steve Bannon. He was interviewed on ITV News. This was about 2 weeks ago, but I think in the context of what's going on with Ukraine, I think it's interesting to get the perspective.
Thank you, Robert. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Now, for British viewers who are not quite as close to what's going on, in your part of town as Americans, you were close to Donald Trump. You fell out. What is your relationship with him now?
I'm not so sure where we fell out, but I'm very close to President Trump. Have been for many years, particularly after he left the White House in 2021.
And so how much advice do you give him at the moment on a sort of daily, weekly basis?
Well, we have the number one show for MAGA, the number one show for activists streaming on podcasts and radio every day for 4 hours, 6 days a week, of which he gets a lot of the content from. And I don't want to disclose, personal conversations with him, but we're in pretty close contact.
And so we're going to go to a break in just a second. I've got one related question, and then I've got loads more to talk to you. You have said that your Make America Great Again, your MAGA movement, has trained 3,000 people to enter government were Donald Trump to be re-elected president. Who are these people? What jobs would they do?
When you win the presidency, you immediately get 3,000 political appointees to basically work with and control 2.2 million federal employees, about 2.5 in the military, and about 16 million contractors. It's about 20 million. Remember, we spend $7 trillion a year. We run a $2 to $2.5 trillion deficit that we can't pay for. We just print money to do it. When you win the presidency, you get 3,000 political appointees immediately, and you get 1,000 that have to be Senate confirmed. We're training many more than the 3,000. As you know, in 16, where we came from behind and won, we weren't really ready with the depth of talent you needed and the number of people trained up to take over really the executive branch. This time, we're training much more than 3,000. The Heritage Organization, Center for Renewing America, all these different organizations that are conservative or on MAGA are training tens of thousands. 3,000 will be the first wave that hits that will really staff the Trump government at every level, from Department of Energy, Department of Defense. Every billet that needs to be filled will be filled pretty quickly in the second term.
Steve, don't go away, because I want to know.
I think his point. This is a short video. It's around 8 minutes long, but the administrative state, all right, is ballooned out to the point where, one, it's not very efficient. It's too costly. And it gives the potentiality of overreach by the government. Now, I've been saying that this national security state needs to be truncated, if not totally abolished. Now, if corporate America is downsizing because of computerization or artificial intelligence or just a change in buyer behavior, change in supply and demand, then why doesn't the government start to properly size instead of continually ballooning out? This is something that was going on even in some of the European countries. Just the government keeps on ballooning out to the point where people didn't want to work in the private sector, they wanted to work in government. And we're seeing that today in the United States. So we need to seriously downsize the government, not just the CIA, the FBI, but we're talking all these agencies. They're just the bureaucracy, the ballooning out of the quote the administrative state it's gotten to a point where it's not sustainable, and we don't have the funds. I mean, people don't understand. America is not very prosperous relative to relative to what we think. The reality of the situation in terms of prosperity in the United States and how we what we think is prosperous in relative terms to, because prosperity is always kind of like measured through a relative metric relative to other countries. Our perspective is we're so much more rich, we're so much wealthier, we're so much healthier, we have so much more freedoms. The reality is on all those metrics, we're also another metric is we're so much happier. All these metrics are, in terms of our perspective, when you look at it to reality, our perspective is way overblown. The reality is that America is not as prosperous as we think. America is not as happy as we think. America is not as healthy as we think. So we can't continue to afford this ballooning of the government, of the administrative state, the national security state, the military industrial complex. We can't keep on doing this by just exporting our debt. That's what we do. We print money and other people buy it. And so that printed money, all right, is floating around. All right. Now, how it's done is through the bond market. We create all this debt, we issue bonds, people buy the bonds, and that money that's out there goes to the banks that actually deal the bonds. So if Saudi Arabia or China decides to buy $50 billion worth of bond issuance on a certain day, all right, the banks that are issuing this debt, right, the banks that are actually the dealers, let's say JP Morgan, they give them this bond that was issued by the Treasury. And they buy that bond. The Saudis buy the bond, the $50 billion worth of bonds. JP Morgan gives them the bonds, and Saudi Arabia gives them the cash. And what's happening is it kind of, what happens is it gives you this false reality that we're stable. But all we did was actually just issue debt. And we soaked up someone else's funds, but they have to buy it in dollars. So the other part of the equation is the Federal Reserve keeps on printing money. All right. And that's sort of what, as the money is being printed, right, the Saudis can't buy the bonds in any other currency other than dollars. So it kind of soaks up this over printing from the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve can dial it in and out by either selling bonds in the market and soaking up money, or they can buy bonds and put more money into the system, which is what the Federal Reserve does. So when the Treasury is issuing bonds, they will have the dealers sell. But on the other side of the of some of this activity is that the Federal Reserve at times will say, well, we'll also buy some of that debt. We'll also buy some of those bonds, and they're putting more money into the system. So they're building up the monetary base. They're expanding the monetary base when they're doing it. So this country would fall apart if it wasn't for foreign investors buying our sovereign debt. It's a major problem. The moment that the world stops using the American currency for certain commodities, let's say oil, or for other exchanges of goods, and or they stop buying American debt, US bonds, the whole system will collapse. Just keep that in mind. The whole American system is predicated on people using the US dollar and people buying US bonds. And so when that demand starts to go down, which it is, as less people buy US debt in the foreign market, when less commodities are traded within US dollars, we're going to start seeing that unless we soak up the dollars that we had printed for decades, that dynamic alone, assuming we don't print anything else and there's no fiscal increase in spending by Congress, let's just assume all that's the same. Just the dynamic of people using less dollars in the international market and people not buying US debt, it will be extremely inflationary. So instead of like 5% inflation or 7% inflation, you're talking about 25 or 30% inflation when that dynamic happens. So the only way to stop that is to start soaking up lots and lots of debt, or lots and lots of dollars that were printed, with that demand that is starting to wane in the international market, with the currency demand and our debt demand. They don't want to buy it. They don't want to use their dollars. And there's no big means of soaking in all those dollars to reduce that inflation. So Congress in the shorthand will start to increase your taxes. So your goods are going to be more expensive and you're going to have less money because you're taxed more. And then all of a sudden the whole system starts to collapse. America is only prosperous not because we're so hardworking, not because of all this tech we have. It's because people use dollars and people buy US debt. That is the only reason why we are prosperous.
What you would hope a Trump presidency would do and achieve. So we'll be back with you in just a couple of minutes. Welcome back. I'm delighted that Steve Bannon is still with me. Steve, historically, you and President Trump have mistrusted what people call the deep state. Will you try and replace people at the top of the CIA and the FBI and all of that?
Well, of course, that's the prerogative of a president. We will definitely have picks. Remember, let's go back to the previous conversation. You have actually 2 million federal employees, but then you have 16 to 18 million contractors. We have what's called the administrative state that was never structured in our Constitution. It's kind of taken over the government. It's these bureaucrats. It's in every form of American life. And yes, and the rogue element of that, the national security, the intelligence, law enforcement, that's the rogue element of that, is what we call the deep state. The first line of attack is the administrative state, and certainly President Trump is going to replace members of the CIA, DNI, all that, which he has the prerogative to do. Those are the 1,000 Senate confirmed positions. But President Trump will look to deconstruct the administrative state. The Supreme Court's already ended this right now, reviewing cases about downsizing this bureaucracy. Because in your previous conversation, you talked about a financial crisis and economic crisis in the United Kingdom. We have it to the 10th power here. We're running $2.5 trillion deficits every year. We have $34 trillion of face amount of debt, and we're adding $1 trillion about every 100 days, Robert. We're reaching a financial crisis of epic proportion. It has to be dealt with. One of the ways to deal with that is to deconstruct the administrative state that's helping to drive this.
Yep.
When Donald Trump talks about a 10% tariff on all imports, is that something you approve of?
Yes.
100%. I'm a populist, and I believe in building a manufacturing base here in the United States. I think that,
You know, since I've spent a lot of time as an automotive engineer in Detroit, all right, and know a lot about manufacturing and engineering, you know what? America started going down the tubes right after NAFTA. The whole tool and die industry in the Detroit area and in Ohio and Illinois, Indiana, we saw the export of the tool and die industry right into Canada right after NAFTA was passed. We also saw a lot of jobs and a lot of manufacturing going to Mexico. Now, this is all in the 90s. All right. Now, you know, go back to the early 2000s when there was this big push to start moving lower added manufacturing to China, brought to you by Walmart. We lost a lot of manufacturing jobs. Now, some of those jobs have come back. Some of those jobs will never come back because just automation is much more implemented in manufacturing than, let's say, back in the 90s. So there's a combination of a change in technology for manufacturing. Demand has changed, but we have this administrative state, if you want to call it that, all right, that policymakers pushed an agenda to move manufacturing overseas so we import goods. Why? Because we would be importing those goods in dollars, right? And they would have, these individuals would be, these other countries would be making goods, right? And purchasing sometimes raw materials from us, sometimes not. Now, what was happening is that we would put it in low-cost centers. Low-cost centers meant that you could be buying a certain product for $20 from China. If it was made in the United States, let's say $30. So you basically imported deflation by $10. So this is another one of those dynamics I was saying, that the United States government has a lot of debt out there that's inflationary, and there's this added inflationary component when the Federal Reserve increases the monetary base. And they try to reduce it and make it seem as it's not so inflationary by going overseas to import deflation. So it's a combination of not just what the Federal Reserve is doing. It's not just what the Treasury is doing in terms of bond issuance. And it's not just exporting manufacturing and that dynamic of importing deflation. And then on top of it, you have so many of the international finance community making money on, you know, moving FDI into China or into lower cost centers and getting a very high return year over year. So the hedge funds and the ETF funds out there loved it. And then on top of it, you would have certain types of politicians being able to, you know, make certain deals, you know, and we saw this happen with Hunter Biden. So there's more chances of corruption and more chances to pay to play. It's a very bad situation for the United States in this regard.
That's really going to be is against China, and maybe even the tariffs will be higher. The manufacturing jobs, remember, the elites in our country, the people that run Wall Street, Silicon Valley, the corporatists that run the businesses in our country are really globalist, and they're much more in business with the Chinese Communist Party than they are with the American people. We need to put some restrictions on those folks. That's where we're going to, I think, increase the tariffs at least 10%. I think hopefully more against the Chinese to start to bring the manufacturing base back to the United States and create high benefit jobs.
And when Donald Trump talks about sorting out,
we need to bring back the manufacturing base for a couple of reasons. One, we need people employed in our country and not worry about other people's countries. Two, it will help rebuild families in the United States. Because if you have a job and you have a stable job and a nice paying job, then you're going to be building, there's going to be family creation that's taking place. And then on top of it, what's going to happen is that you're going to probably start seeing a voting bloc that's going to be pushing for candidates that are trying to strengthen the manufacturing base in the United States. The United States manufacturing has been gutted for 30 years. That's a long time. It's going to take a while for it to rebuild up. If you start looking at since the crisis in 2020, quality of things have gone down. The quality of service, the quality of products, they cost more. We need to get back into manufacturing quality goods in the United States. And then that's pressure on the government to stop importing deflation. Because remember what I said, they try to import deflation by moving manufacturing to China, having the Chinese buy American bonds because they were flush with American cash and they didn't know what to do with it. So that just allowed for the administrative state to keep on ballooning out and be inflationary. The United States needs to actually start reducing the number of dollars that we're creating, bring back American jobs, and bring down the cost of living. The standard of living cost is too much. There needs to be a little bit deflation that's going on in America, not reduced inflation. Reduced inflation means it's still going up. You know, it went up 15%. Oh, now inflation's only 2%. No, you need deflation to get back to a reasonable lifestyle that's affordable. So America needs to kind of tighten the belt, but bring back the manufacturing. By bringing back manufacturing, we're not going to have situations like, well, wait a minute, we have a crisis. How are we going to have our pharmaceuticals made? Oh, we have a crisis. How are we going to be able to make bullets if we have a war? If you've got the manufacturing, you lose that prowess to being able to be more self-sufficient. But the bankers, the Federal Reserve, the Congress, Wall Street, the hedge funds, they all work together to move manufacturing overseas so Congress can and the Treasury can continue to print more bonds to sell in the international market. Because if China didn't have American jobs, the American manufacturing jobs in China, then China wouldn't have the American money to be able to buy the American extra debt that we keep on. So if we cut off the demand for American debt because of this exporting of manufacturing to China and other countries, then it tells Congress very forcefully, stop spending the American taxpayer dollar, their hard-earned income, and trying to fake it by not increasing taxes so much, but just inflate the dollar. because you're taxed two ways, directly by increasing taxes or indirectly through inflation. And most of the time, Congress will pick the inflationary route. You stop it by cutting off the demand for American bonds. And then it will be a signal to force Congress to stop spending. But the American public will have to tighten the belt. So short-term pain will mean long-term benefit.
"24 hours." What does he mean?
Well, I think he's the best negotiator to do it. But Robert, I think the Ukraine war is going to get sorted out here in the next 72 hours or the next week. Remember, the United States Senate, and particularly the Republicans, they're about to drop two thermonuclear bombs on the people of the United States. One is essentially an amnesty program at the border that's going to give immediate work permits to the 8 million illegal alien invaders that have come in on the Biden watch. At the same time, to do this, to get $60 billion to send to the corrupt oligarchs in Ukraine. And the Republican Party is going to fight this tooth and nail. We're going to fight it in the House. MAGA does not want one more penny going to Zelensky and these corrupt oligarchs in Ukraine. We want people to go to the negotiating table. It's time to stop killing on American money, the $120 billion we've already put in, to stop killing innocent Ukrainians. It's time to get to the negotiating table. I think President Trump could cut that deal in 48 hours. But I got to tell you, I think that this Ukraine situation is going to be solved well before he gets back to office.
But surely it would be appalling for peace in the world if Putin, hangs on to a large chunk, about a third of Ukraine, as a result of an illegal invasion.
The eastern Russian-speaking border of Ukraine is not in the vital national security interest of the United States. What's in the vital national security of the United States is the southern border of the United States, about our sovereignty, our territorial integrity. And in addition, starting to have our NATO partners start to be an alliance and stop being a protectorate. The first thing the Europeans are start thinking about is you've got to get up to the 2%, which I think the United Kingdom does in Poland, but you have to become an alliance, not a protectorate. A strong NATO alliance where the individual nation states are actually getting militaries and paying 2% of the GDP, which they committed to, with the United States as an alliance partner, not an overall security guarantee by the United States, is the way to thwart Russian aggression. I spent 8 years of my life as a young man as a naval officer, 4 years in the Pacific, in the South China Sea, and then in the North Arabian Sea and Persian Gulf on a destroyer that was ASW hunting Soviet submarines. I spent a couple of years at the Pentagon when we worried about the Soviet Union, the Bolsheviks coming across the North German plain, the Fulda Gap. That's not a point today. You saw 80% of the combat capability of the Russians, I think, by NATO have been destroyed in Ukraine. So I don't think you have to worry about. I don't think you have to worry about.
I'm being told, unfortunately, slightly frustratingly, because there's so much more I want to talk to you about. We are out of time.
All right, so that was Bannon. In terms of Ukraine, I believe the American taxpayer cannot afford anymore sending money over there. Not only that, we spent so much money already and they couldn't get the job done. And the perspective of the U.S. national security state has been poking the bear for the last 30 years. 20 of those, 20 plus years of that was when Putin was in office. So our CIA has caused this issue to happen. All right, what actually happened in Ukraine in 2014 with the coup? What was going on during Obama's administration with Ukraine? Seems to be a lot of connections between Hunter Biden and Ukraine and Biden, Joe Biden. Seems a lot of nefarious things were going on over there. And then Zelensky has this assumption that all the Western powers should be just continually shovel money there. If you were listening to Zelensky, you would have heard over the period of time that this war has been going on, Zelensky kept on saying, America needs to, help. Germany needs to help, keep on sending money and equipment. And then when he was starting to advance several months ago, all right, and it looked a little bit more positive for Ukraine and more negative for Russia and Putin. This was when the whole Wagner Group fiasco was happening. Zelensky actually asked for, not only does he need money for military operations, he needs money for rebuilding. It's going to be a never-ending, bottomless pit for the American taxpayer in Ukraine. We need to pull the plug. One, because we were poking the bear that we shouldn't have been poking. We should have been integrating Russia into the world economy and be more peaceful with Russia and be able to have a stronger footing against China if they invade Taiwan. That would be the better strategic goal. But the administrative state that's ballooned out that we pay for has all these plans about, how bad Russia is. They have a Cold War mentality, and we're out of the Cold War. And that will lead into this idea that because of this new emergent behavior from this national security state, we're moving into what Neil Ferguson has said, Cold War 2.0. Now, before we do that, I want to play from Times Radio about Bolton.
Folks who have stopped driving at night need to see this. Did the Harvard Stem Cell Institute just find a way to restore crystal clear 20/20 vision without glasses, contacts, or surgery? The best part, this incredibly new technology.
I think a second Trump term would do enormous damage.
All right, let's play this. Just that commercial is random, right? But they were talking about the Harvard Stem Cell Research Center. One of my professors, Dr. Anderson, William Anderson, he's one of the professors that's tied to that research facility at Harvard. And there's some amazing stuff that is happening in stem cell research. That's for sure. That's just as a random fact. But okay, let's go with Bolton. All right, here we go.
Withdrawal from NATO alone would be a catastrophe and not repairable.
He looks, Ambassador, like an unstoppable force when it comes to becoming the Republican candidate, doesn't he?
Well, if you had to bet today that he would be the nominee, I think that would be a pretty safe bet, but it's not certain. And Chris Christie's withdrawal opens the possibility that either Nikki Haley or still Ron DeSantis have a chance to beat him. My own view is that really only about 30 or 35% of the Republican Party support.
So this is an old video. I apologize.
His backing has increased
I didn't
because
realize
of these court cases.
this was such an old video. I was hoping that was a newer video. Because it was talking about Trump and NATO, so I figured it was part of the whole new comment that Trump made. Let's play Ian Bremmer. He's pretty good on economic and international.
Hi everybody, Ian Bremmer here, and a quick tip to kick off your week. Could be so much to talk about. I say kick off, so you think it's Super Bowl, but no, I'm not going there. Don't. I mean, I care, but not after the game's over. Then I'm kind of done. It's exciting that way. I love sports. Very excited, and then over immediately. Let's move on to NATO. And
I have to interrupt because this is my show and I'll interrupt whenever I want to. So, Ian, this football season, in terms of the NFL and the Super Bowl, that Super Bowl was totally rigged. And I'll tell you, the Chiefs, football player that's dating Taylor Swift, I'll tell you, this whole thing is to soak up Swifties to start watching the game because there was falling ratings going on with the NFL. And then on top of it, you play 2 national anthems. The last I looked, there's only one nation in the United States. So what's happening is the NFL is becoming this virtue signaling operation to try to convince you to, you know what, go to CVS and get an inoculation. Brought to you by, you know, Big Pharma. And then Taylor Swift is telling you, go vote for Biden. And meanwhile, you have half of the football players kneeling. There's no respect for God, country, and family anymore. And you're seeing it in the NFL. I mean, this boyfriend of Taylor Swift, I mean, even though he's a larger structured guy because he's a football player, but he kind of has this kind of metrosexual kind of look to him, especially when he had this, you know, this new outfit that when he was walking off the plane before the game. I'll tell you, NFL has gone straight to hell, straight to fucking hell. That's why I just watch collegiate football, because the NFL is bullshit. Ian.
Lots of hair on fire because former President Trump, about to become the Republican nominee, could easily be president again, says that, recounting a conversation he had with a leading European leader. I suspect he's talking about Angela Merkel and Germany, and that if they refused to pay, that he wouldn't be interested in defending them, and indeed that he would tell the Russians they could do whatever the hell they wanted to countries that refused to pay for their own self-defense. And predictably, this got Europeans very agitated. The NATO Secretary General, the European Council President, both saying this is only good for Putin. It weakens the alliance, with Trump saying that, especially saying that publicly. And the Europeans are indeed, almost all the Europeans are panicked about what might happen if Trump were to become president in 2025. And I think these are all real points and deserve to be responded to. I do think it's important to look at the other side of the equation at the same time, which is, should there be consequences for American allies that are unwilling to prioritize their own self-defense?
Damn straight.
And by the
We
way,
shouldn't
when
be
I say
paying for it.
consequences, I don't mean that the Russians should be able to invade them, but should there be any consequences, or should they just continue to be perfect NATO allies in good standing? Because
when it comes to the leaders over in Europe, there are a bunch of Euro whiners that want the American taxpayer to pay. Now, the American taxpayer is going to pay in 2 ways: increased taxes and or increased inflation. Why should we be paying their way in NATO? Trump is 100% right. You know what? If you don't pay, then there should be consequences. There should be increased amount that you need to fund to pay the back debt. There should be other, maybe economic trading between the countries that balance this out. There needs to be some sort of penalty. When you don't penalize because of bad behavior, then you'll continue to have it happen. Case in point, just look in the urban areas of America. If you don't hold the thieves accountable that are going to these stores, stealing the shoes, stealing Gucci down Fifth Avenue, if you don't hold them accountable, they'll continue doing it. If you don't hold accountable a group of people that can't pull up their pants, they're never going to pull up their pants.
facto policy of the United States appears to be, well, otherwise, yeah, tell them they need to pay more, but we're not going to do anything if they don't. And that also doesn't seem reasonable. That seems like a policy that is guaranteed to alienate the Americans and lead to a much weaker NATO. In fact, if you are a country that is not spending on your own self-defense for years and years, that also is a strong signal to Vladimir Putin. That also is a very weak signal to the future of the NATO alliance. But unfortunately, that message is never sent.
Ian, let's question, does NATO need to be that strong? We're not in a Cold War. Now Ferguson thinks that we are moving into a Cold War 2.0, but that's because our national security state fucked up for the last 30 years and expanded NATO. Why do we have NATO after the fall of the Berlin Wall? We don't need it. Or we can drastically cut it down. But no, you got to keep on growing. The national security state can't never not have less money. They always have to have more money.
By the president of the European Council or by the leaders of the countries that don't care about spending on their own defense. I mean, the Canadians, for example, spend less than 1.3% of GDP on defense. That's roughly exactly what they were spending in the 90s. Why? Because they don't think they need to. They don't think it really matters. The Germans, the Italians, the Spaniards, I mean, most of the large economies other than the United States significantly underspend on defense. They don't have adequate troop readiness. They don't have adequate military capabilities, never mind to provide support for Ukraine or other countries that might need it that aren't NATO members, but even to adequately defend themselves. And that's a serious problem. It's been going on for decades. In part,
maybe if less people spent less money on defense, maybe there would be less wars. Maybe.
Because of a belief that there was a peace dividend, that there weren't going to be wars anymore in Europe. So they didn't really care about NATO and let the Americans spend if they want to, but we don't have to. And that's unacceptable as well, especially when the Russians invade Ukraine. Now, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a lot of countries took it more seriously. That's why Finland has joined NATO. That's why Sweden is about to join NATO. Certainly, the frontline countries.
Wait a minute here, Ian. Didn't you watch the video from Tucker? Putin said 5 reasons why he invaded Ukraine. And oh, guess what? All those 5 reasons was an expansion of American prowess. That's why. And he kept on begging them to stop. Assuming that Putin is telling the truth. But what he said seems really logical. And oh, by the way, if you look at this big arc of 30 years or even 50 years, the CIA has colossally fucked up this world. And expanding NATO is not the answer. But America shouldn't be paying for it.
More worried, and they spend a lot more. But those countries that are free riding in the back, they don't care as much. And clearly the right answer is somewhere in between. It is that for years and years, the Americans need to say that if you don't spend, or else. And that or else needs to be consequential, needs to have, we won't have as many military exercises with you, or we're not going to share the same level of intelligence, or we're not going to provide as advanced military equipment. And if you do that and make it matter, then those countries are much more likely to do something like actually take
No. They don't care about that, because they know that the United States is going to continue to do the military drills for readiness. What you have to do is go to the EU and say, you're going to be taxed. And they will then start spending money for NATO. See, it's all about taxing goods and services. See, the Achilles heel for the globalization, Ian, and I know you're a globalist, is taxing. And that's why Trump was so effective, because he understands that. You don't like an international player, you tax the hell out of them. And then they'll start playing ball.
Oh, you have no fist in your glove. Now, there is a broader question, which is whether a President Trump actually wants the Europeans to spend 2% and then he'll be happy and committed, or whether he believes that NATO is just a drag on the United States. It's a multilateral group. It's a commitment with countries that the Americans would rather not be committed to, that Trump thinks it's a fool's game and would rather leave. There are those that have worked with Trump that feel that way. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton certainly thinks that, has articulated that that is Trump's actual private view. Hard to know. We'll say that Trump feels much more comfortable with allies like the Saudis, for example. And you'll remember that he traveled there before he traveled to European countries or to Canada, in part because the Saudis, not just short-term transactionally, but longer term, are committed to U.S. defense, but also recognize that they need to spend, and that there is a very ongoing mutual backstop.
I'm sorry, Ian. Sit down and get a history lesson. All right? The Cold War ended. NATO doesn't need to expand. It actually needs to shrink. Not completely dissolved. And the Europeans need to foot more of the bill and not the Americans. Secondly, there is going to be a major shift in economic activity in the next 50 to 100 years that's going to be Israel, Saudi centric, and Jordan centric. So Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt centric. That region is going to be it'll be the next century of activity. It's not China. It's not China. China is actually declining. We've been told that it's going to be the century of China. Actually, what's going to happen is there's going to be a fucking war in Asia. And the United States and China are going to go at it. It probably will use some sort of tactical nuke activity. Or, at the very least, other unconventional warfare that probably has already been used in 2020. I don't need to say it because I want this up on YouTube, Ian. And when that does happen, the Chinese will lose, but they will lose big. And we are going to be a lesser power in the end. We'll win it, but we are not going to come out of it like we came out of World War II. And so what's going to happen is that the centroid of economic activity is going to be moving to the Middle East. And I think Trump knows this. So this Cold War bullshit is irrelevant. The action is how we handle Asia and how can we minimize the long-term damage to America, to the United States, when we do go to war with China. It's going to happen. And we're going to be a failed empire after. Don't be an idiot, Ian.
countries. And the fact that the Saudis don't share American values is of very little interest to Trump, in part because the United States frequently doesn't live up to those values, and certainly Trump doesn't care very much.
It's the
about
alignment, Ian, open up your Bible. It's the alignment of Ishmael and Jacob against Esau. That's what's happening. Wake up.
And that the Europeans, in being committed to multilateralism and rule of law, which Trump isn't as interested in, but also more willing to use that to help, sort of strengthen an alliance system that has values as a component of it, is something that Trump thinks the Americans get taken advantage of with. Now, again, where you land on that spectrum, I think differs radically on, how old you are, your historic worldview of the Cold War, for example, where your country is geographically, what your immediate threat environment is like. Also, how you feel about the United States. I mean, as an American, do you think the U.S. has been good for you? Or do you feel like you've been screwed by the United States? I mean, if you've got kids that went to war in Afghanistan or even the second war in Iraq, and didn't come back, came back with PTSD, and the Veterans Administration didn't take adequate care of you, and you don't think the war was fought justly or for principles that you believe in, you probably feel very differently about what the U.S. should and shouldn't be doing in terms of other military alliances, than you do, say, my dad.
You know what? The thing is, there's too many people making the decision, like Mitt Romney in the Senate, to send money to Ukraine. But is he sending his kids? Is he going in a military vehicle over to Ukraine and fight? Of course not. Of course not. But he's got a lot of money in the bank, and he's going to enjoy his life. We have too many people making the decision that their decision has no long-term consequences on their family or them personally. And there's the problem. My whole life has been nothing but America at war. America at war. My whole life. When did we have peace? Ian.
Fought in Korea, or others that were World War II veterans, certainly, or those in the United States didn't fight for anything, but nonetheless feel like the American system did pretty well for them. And it's that latter problem. It's the fact that so many Americans today don't feel like their political system is legitimate, don't feel like the American dream applies to them, don't feel the class mobility, don't trust their leaders or their institutions across the board.
How could you have class mobility when you have the Treasury Department that's lying to you about inflation, aka Secretary Yellen? It's transitory. Yeah, right. You have a Federal Reserve that keeps on printing money. You have a Congress that keeps on spending money and giving incentive to ship jobs overseas. Where's the social mobility anymore? It sure as hell's not the way it used to be in the 80s and the 90s. You have the younger generation that's saying that it's hard for them to even get a job after college. When I was young, it was easy to get a job even if you didn't go to college. Totally different dynamics now. Totally different dynamics. People aren't creating families because they cost too much. And it's not just an American problem. The same goddamn thing is happening in Japan. Globalization failed. It's time to reboot, and it's localization, baby. But you wouldn't understand that, Ian, because you're a globalist.
So much space for populists in the United States to say, why are we doing for other countries? Trump's other statement that we saw over the last few days, we shouldn't give any foreign aid. It should all be loans. And if you don't behave in ways that we like going forward, then we should take those loans away and we should make you pay it back. And he didn't say that only applies to the Europeans. From his perspective, that would apply to Israel. That would apply to the Japanese. That would apply to Mexico. Canada doesn't care. Doesn't care. It's America.
You know, the thing is, America shouldn't be the smorgasbord for the world. It's time for other people to pay for their own way. It's time for them. If they need help, give them a helping hand. But there has to be some sort of payback. Because what happens is they'll just keep on going like a pig at the trough and just eat more, you know, bacon and pancakes at the smorgasbord because it's all you can eat.
And more Americans will feel that way if they think that their country that hasn't taken care of, doesn't take care of them or their kids. I don't feel that way. I'd like to live in the United States. It's the richest country in the world, and we have much more ability to do more for others. And long term, I think that plays to our advantage. But I absolutely understand why many Americans no longer feel that way. And I think it's a shame. And I think we need to take responsibility to do something about that if we want a different outcome. So that's it for me for today. I hope everyone's doing well, and I'll talk to y'all real soon.
More bird droppings from Ian. Before we go to the next video, I would like to explain to the audience the anti-aging boxes that I have in my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. I have different anti-aging boxes. I curated them in such a way where it's different products to help synergistically use these supplements in such a way that it will either improve your skin or you know, help with the aging process. So I want to focus on one that I call the anti-Fauci box. I have an anti-Fauci beginners box and an anti-Fauci advanced box. Now, because of the name of the box, you can understand why I'm calling it this. It will improve your immune system, and it's based on 3 pillars. One pillar is neutralize pathogens, the other is bring down free radicals, and the last pillar is bring down inflammation. All right, that's the core of the anti-aging protocol and to help to boost up your immune system. So I created these 2 boxes. I have many different anti-aging boxes, but for this video, I just want to focus on 2. Now, on the anti-aging Fauci beginners box, you get Health Max 35. All right, you take a teaspoon of it a day. If you're not feeling well, take a tablespoon. You get D3, which helps to get rid of infected cells through apoptosis, and it helps with gene expression. You need this. Trust me. Magnesium and zinc to help boost up your immune system. You take that every day. For the D3, I take 10,000 units, 5,000 in the morning and 5,000 at night. Turmeric will bring down that inflammation, and it's an antioxidant. And ashwagandha root, which will control blood glucose levels and help with, you know, stress response. All right. So please go to the store and get the anti-Fauci beginners box or the advanced box. Now, in the advanced box, you get everything I just mentioned, and you'll have the ability to pick either a 2-ounce C60 in coconut oil or a 2-ounce in avocado oil. All right, C60 is important because it's an extremely strong antioxidant. Very potent. You take a full dropper of this or a tablespoon. I'm sorry, not a tablespoon, a teaspoon or a full dropper every day. All right. And that will bring down that free radical load and help to improve the cellular health. Now, when we have a buildup of free radicals, the cell starts to break down. It's not as efficient. And if it's damaged enough, it can either go into reversible necrosis or irreversible necrosis. Okay? So you want to prevent damage to the cells. If you take the C60 on a regular basis every day, a teaspoon or a full dropper every day, right? Then what will happen is that you're going to start seeing that you're going to have less cellular stress and the cells will work more properly. The metabolism of the cells in the different tissues will work more properly. Each tissue has a certain function. So if they're working properly, your body's in homeostasis. If they're not working properly, you're not in homeostasis. So you want to take the C60 every day. All right. And then when you do that, it's going to improve the health of the mitochondria and your ATP is going to start to go up. When you have more ATP, you're going to have more energy. You know, by the way, you need to have a strong immune system. You need ATP. That's part of, it's not the only reason, but that's part of the reason why when you get older, your immune system starts to go down. It's not the only reason. There's also a reduction in memory cells of B and T, memory T cells and B cells, and there's more complications when it comes to geriatric care and aging. But you want to slow it down. And you can slow down the aging process by neutralizing pathogens with the Max 35. Take a teaspoon of it a day. If you're sick, take a tablespoon or two a day. Take C60, either coconut or coconut oil or avocado. All right, this is the 2-ounce bottle. And take the turmeric and the ashwagandha root. And that, as a core, will slow down the aging process and boost up your immune system. So go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the beginner's anti-aging Fauci box. The anti-Fauci beginner's box. The beginner's box is $200. The advanced box with the C60, you can pick either coconut or avocado 2-ounce, is $260. Go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and you're getting a lot of high quality supplements. And you follow what I'm saying, you are going to slow down the aging process. And by the way, you're going to be boosting up your immune system, and you're going to need a boosted up immune system. You know why? Because of the crisis that we went through and the aftershock that I've been talking about for a long time. All right. So, and I'm willing to bet that Ian didn't have that knowledge either. No idiots. Okay, let's see what CNN has to say about Trump's stance on NATO by Allied Commander.
Don't watch this ad if you don't want more confidence or to feel like a man. Are your green box leaving you look like an oil spill? Johnny Slicks can help. Bartender.
Fallout.
Wesley Clark, Allied Commander, General, retired General Wesley Clark. Okay, now, what war did you win, dude? General. Oh, none. Not one general has won one war since World War II. Not one. Not one.
NATO. Listen to what the former president and Republican frontrunner told a campaign rally in South Carolina over the weekend.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want.
The NATO Secretary General said Trump's claim that he would encourage Russia to attack U.S. allies if they did not spend enough on defense puts American and European soldiers.
You know what it is? No, what it is it's shifting the responsibility on the European nations because America shouldn't be constantly, running to the damsel in distress, aka Europe. George Washington, before he left office, warned the American public, do not get into European wars. And guess what? We're getting into European wars and we have problems. And we are actually seeing the downfall of America in our generation. Thank you very much, the national security state. Thank you very much, the policy wonks. Thank you very much for all the ones that think they know and how the world should be. You just fucked up America. You just broke America. You know what? Even though there's a lot of people that don't like the way Trump speaks, if you actually listen to what he is saying, it is genius. The Europeans should have their own responsibility for their defense. And by being more defensive, in terms of paying for your own defense in Europe, then it will signal Russia that, oh, by the way, maybe there needs to be more peace negotiations. Reason being, one, they don't want neither side really wants a war. It's too destructive. It's too disruptive economically also. And when the Europeans notice that as they're spending more on defense, that they can't spend as much on social programs, their people will start to vote those leaders out of office and push for peace over the long haul. So them being responsible for paying their own way in defense is twofold. Signals Russia, you know what? They're serious, and maybe slow down on further conflict. But it also signals to the European nations, you can't really afford it. So start integrating Russia into the international economic community, which is what Putin has been begging for the last 20 years. But you won't hear that on CNN. You'll only hear that on PNN.
Increased risk. And the European Union's top diplomat said NATO's security cannot depend on how a president of the US feels on any particular day.
It's not yes, now yes, tomorrow no, it depends who are you. Oh, come on, let's be serious. Let's be serious. NATO cannot be an alliance a la carte. It exists or it not exists.
NATO is propped up by the American taxpayer. And the American taxpayer is too stressed. They can't afford it anymore. Europe, stop drinking your wine and your fancy cheese and start paying your own way. Let's be serious. It's time to pay the bill.
But I did want to ask you, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, to react to Donald Trump's comments where he effectively invited Russia to invade NATO countries that...
General, what war did you win? Oh, none. All right, okay. And he's in Little Rock, Arkansas. Hopefully he doesn't get Arkansas.
not have given as much to NATO as they are asked to.
You know, John, you can't put enough adjectives on this to describe how treasonous such a comment is, how unfeeling, how insensitive to the fears of Europeans, many of whom have lived under Russian oppression. They know exactly what it is. They're much closer to the problem in Ukraine than Donald Trump has ever been, and they know what's going on.
Let's just resurrect the Cold War. And oh, by the way, the fall of the Berlin Wall happened what was it, in the early 90s? It was 91, wasn't it? Or very, very late 80s, somewhere in there. I think it was around 91, I thought. So that you have two generations that have passed by, General. They have no idea about this pre-Berlin Wall. General, stop thinking it's the Cold War. Many Europeans had no understanding of what it was like during the 1950s or the 1960s during the Cold War, or even the 70s. Their grandparents, maybe, a little bit of memory from their parents' generation. The people that would really truly been affected by the Cold War are dying out.
Extinction against a nation of 40 million people to destroy the culture, the language, the history, and anybody who's associated with resistance to Russian occupation. So you could have 10 million people killed if Russia comes in there. Trump just is all about himself. He makes shocking statements. Maybe he wouldn't actually do this.
What it is,
Maybe
you got these globalists and you have these national security state types that want nothing but projection of power. They want nothing but never-ending funding of war. So when you have someone that actually questions the validity and the need for NATO, let alone who's going to pay for it, maybe Trump's right. Maybe we need to have a long talk. Should there be NATO? And if so, who's going to pay for it? And don't keep on resurrecting this Cold War bullshit. Because the action is really going to be in the Middle East and in Asia. And the faster we integrate with Russia economically, the better off we will be when the conflict in Asia happens. General. But because you never won a fucking war, you're leading us down a catastrophe.
Theater, but he shouldn't do such things. And we know from his previous administration that he actually was working to disassemble NATO. So I put a lot of credence in what he says. It's not just a shock statement, although it is that. This is a warning to the American people of what's going to happen if Donald Trump becomes the next president of the United States.
I'm willing to bet that if you reduce these types of organizations like NATO, I bet that you'll have less conflict. And you'll have more money because we don't have to fund it. And maybe we'll have Social Security where people that actually are retired will actually have a decent living and have better care. And people that are young or my age that are, not too old, but not too young, right? Right. The Goldilocks years, right? We don't really think about when someone is 70 or 80 years old and being on a fixed income and having to worry about, are they going to be able to eat versus will they be able to take their medication? We have a broken healthcare system that definitely is not elderly centric. But we'll spend all this technology and we'll spend all of this, news about how to do these advanced surgeries for a football player when they blow out their knee. And that football player is so fucking important. The gladiator. Because it's all about bread and circus. But what about that veteran that literally was in war and has a war injury and getting not the care he needs at the veterans associations? at the veterans hospitals. It's a broken system. It's a broken system. Stop funding this bullshit, General, so our elderly actually have a decent last few years of their life where it's not under worry about food security or medication security. But you don't give a shit, General, because you're a senior fellow at UCLA. You have a retirement. And I'm sure that your medical care is a lot better than most elderly in the United States. Most elderly won't want to go to the doctor because they don't have the money for the medication or for the medical bills. So it's not just about, cutting off NATO because of an overexpansion of the national security state. It's the realization that the national security state is literally choking to death the livelihood of the elderly. General.
Comments from Donald Trump, basically inviting Russia to attack in any which way they please because of money, basically, when he talks about NATO and their alliance. I mean, what is this doing to the European Union and all of those that are in the potential line of fire?
Honestly,
let's remember Mick Jagger. Anya Poor, she looks like Mick Jagger. You know, the thing is, NATO was built when there wasn't a European Union. And so the idea was somehow having means to be able to work together just in case the big bad USSR during the Cold War was going to invade. The European Union now has amalgamated. And they have a union now, not just a bunch of states or a bunch of countries like it was back in the early days of the Cold War. So the dynamics have totally changed, Mick Jagger. The European Union could pay for their own fucking defense. We don't really need NATO anymore. Now, there probably was a good reason to have NATO during the Cold War. The expansionists or the concern of the USSR and the lack of amalgamation of a real federation within Europe back in the day. But that's not happening now. The whole premise of NATO needs to be questioned now because things have changed. Mick Jagger.
People are aghast. I mean, they view that kind of invitation, encouragement from the front runner of the United States for the Republican nomination to be, literally insane. I mean, for the presidential candidate of the United States to say that kind of thing publicly while President Putin is having...
Listen here, Mick Jagger. We need a president that's questioning the premises that go all the way back to World War II. Do we want to just keep on going on autopilot, Mick Jagger? Because it doesn't seem to be working. But heaven forbid that you question globalization and the national security state, because if you do, as Chuck Schumer would say, there's 7 ways to Sunday for the CIA to get you. And oh, by the way, we kind of saw that with them interfering with Tucker. Now, there's some strange things with Tucker and the CIA that no one really knows about. But it is not a question that they interfered with him interviewing Putin. No, CIA doesn't do anything wrong, Mick Jagger. I am sick and tired of these talking heads telling you what to think. I'm not trying to tell you what to think. I'm just giving you my perspective because this is PNN, and it seems like there's a lot of bullshit on CNN.
In order to put down his lines of negotiation, which essentially are negotiation on his terms only over Ukraine, for the leading Republican candidate who people must take at his word. Nobody's trying to guess what he's saying. They're taking him at his word. It's caused a huge amount of anxiety, as you can imagine. The usually quite careful and diplomatic Secretary General.
No, we got to be diplomatically, just like how Putin said that Clinton did. Putin asked, hey, would you let us into NATO? Clinton says, that may be a good idea. Maybe it will create peace and prosperity and a real peace dividend. Clinton goes to his advisors and policy wonks in the deep state, and they say, no, we can't do that. Clinton would say, why? Because we have this long plan to fracture Russia and get the fucking oil. Oh, okay.
But came out immediately and dismissed this comment and said, they expect any U.S. president, no matter of what party or who that would be, to abide by the rules of NATO and the Article 5. So the idea of, literally he used the word encourage Russia to do what the hell it wants in Europe is terrifying for Europeans and the rest of the world, especially in the defense of democracy.
If it's so terrifying, Mick Jagger, Germany can pay for it. The UK can pay for it. France can pay for it. Spain can pay for it. Italy can pay for it. Texas should not be paying for it. We have our own problem at the border that we can't control because of a crazy Democratic Party trying to flood our nation. They don't want you to have ketchup for dinner. They want you to have salsa for dinner. Now, salsa is okay for dinner, but on every meal,
order, which the U.S. has, since World War II led.
Yeah, hearing those words were stark to a lot of people's ears, and you heard the response there. Christian Amanpour, thank you so much for coming on the program. Joining me now is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman.
Fuck.
He's the former Director for European Affairs.
Let's roll out a guy that was part of this operation to try to demonize Trump. CNN.
I first just want to get your take on hearing a former president who is the front runner for the Republican Party and for the presidency, if you look at the numbers. What is your take on what he just said publicly?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. First of all, we have to recognize that story is basically made up. That kind of conversation doesn't occur. You don't have a major ally ask questions in that manner. These what ifs are just kind of, almost a cliche Trump made up stories as he's doing rallies and base. But what it does tell you is his intent, which is for some time been speculated on, at least by some elements of the national security community, for those folks that have worked with Donald Trump, that have been in the White House. They know that, in fact, Trump had every intention of withdrawing from NATO. He thinks it's some sort of golf association and you have to pay fees. So I think he clears that up for us now. The problem is that it's also an invitation to somebody like Vladimir Putin, a clear invitation to Vladimir Putin, just like he did inviting Vladimir Putin to interfere in our elections in 2016, releasing emails, all these types of things. He's basically catering to our...
Now, this was put out a day ago. Now, I can't say it because I want to keep this video up on YouTube. So please make sure you subscribe to all my channels. But something was released, FOIA documents were released that showed that there was some sort of operation going on with the CIA and the FBI that created a stir in 2016. Now, you know what I'm talking about. I can't say it because I want the fucking video up on YouTube. Because there's so much censors that are going on. We don't have a free country anymore. And this fucking cocksucker is saying that the Russians got involved in our wonderful November day, which is a total lie. Especially with this new information that was just released last night. And I'll probably will do a video on it, but it will only be on Rumble, Bitchute, and Brighteon. It won't be on YouTube. But you know, the thing is that they keep on peddling the national security state talking points to try to protect the operation that they did. And he's one of them that were part of it.
Enemies and attacking our allies. That's who we're talking about here. The worst enemy to our friends and the best friend to our enemies. Meanwhile, on the other side of the equation, you have Joe Biden welcoming the Chancellor of Germany, attempting to normalize relationships. He's been highly effective in trying to bring a bill to support our Ukraine aid to Congress for a vote. And you know, the stark contrast between these two men is unbelievable. One invites attacks on our allies. I mean, I God forbid, you know, the Polish community sees this and believes that they're next because they're the next ones closest to Russia. I mean, that's where we're talking about, an attack on our allies.
Didn't Putin say, I don't want Poland? There's nothing they have I want? Didn't he say that on Tucker's interview? I'm pretty sure he did.
And being invited by the front runner for the Republican Party.
Lieutenant Colonel Bannon, I am curious what you think this does to the United States and its role in the world. Does what Donald Trump said there really have an impact on how strong the United States is in the rest of the world? Is it making America weak on the world stage?
Absolutely.
Newsflash, honey. America is weak. It's a gigantic facade. Our prosperity is due to just issuing more bonds and hoping that people will transact in dollars. And both of those there's fracture points that are going on. CNN, I tell you, CNN used to be pretty cool. You know, back in the early days, right? Because it was the beginnings of cable news and 24-hour, and you know, you get a little bit of perspective of what's going on internationally. And I remember, you know, even before CNN, Ted Koppel and Nightline, and you know, and this whole kind of like international affairs. That's part of the reason why I was interested in current events, was because of Ted Koppel. You know, before the CNN thing, and then when CNN first started, you know, and they were on cable when cable rolled out to the suburbs. You know, it was kind of cool. Wow. You know, right. But then it just, right after Gulf War I, the Desert Storm, Desert Shield, it went straight to hell. It went straight to hell. And then if you spend time overseas, any length of time, in Europe or in Asia, you'll notice that there is a big US bias domestically in the United States. We're not told the real story. We are not told the real story. Think that we have freedom of press, especially in mainstream media? We don't. We don't even have freedom of press on little channels like mine.
Just look unstable. frankly neurotic, it really kind of depends. We definitely look weak in absolute terms. We have a front runner for one of the two major parties undermining our alliances and pandering to our enemies. So on that, in absolute terms, yes. But
maybe our enemies shouldn't be our enemies anymore. Maybe some of those enemies we should engage with more force. Maybe our alliances shouldn't be propped up by the American taxpayer. You know, we need to view this in a holistic approach. Can we afford it? Is there a cost benefit? Are they, the ones that we're trying to help, really in need of help? Or is it that we're just being told that the bear is in the forest and we got to go hunt the bear? Or perhaps we have to worry a little bit more about the dragon that's in Asia. And we need to be a dragon slayer instead of a bear hunter. We need a little bit more, we need a little bit less of Ted Nugent and a little bit more Beowulf. All right?
Really what it'll come down to is who wins the 2024 election in November. If Biden wins, then we have normalcy, we have stability. If Trump wins, we have utter chaos. So the contrast is
normalcy and stability. For who? Colonel, who? The national security state? The bankers? The ones that are making all this money with the FDI? Because it's sure as hell not the average American citizen. Biden has made things less stable. We didn't have a war in Ukraine under Trump. We didn't run away in Afghanistan with our tail between our legs with Trump. We're not seeing the emergence of World War III in Asia with Trump because he knows where the pressure points are with our enemies and even with our allies that are taking advantage of us. Economic. You want to play ball with us? Okay. Then you'll get preference economically. If you're not playing ball with us, there's going to be taxation. There's going to be sanctions. There's going to be a cut off of the economic activity. That's a smart play. It's a play that actually Reagan did. He basically said to the Japanese automakers, we're not importing your fucking cars. If you want to sell cars in the United States, you build a plant here. And so America was making the cars that they were buying that were Japanese. That's a leader. Biden's not a leader. So stability is only for the national security state. Normalcy is only for the national security state. That, from my premise, is what's the cause of all the problems that we've had for the last 50 years. Maybe not all, but most.
One will continue to maintain the U.S. role, continue to maintain U.S. power and frankly, primacy in the international system. And the other one will just completely unwind all of U.S. power and influence and spell disaster.
Colonel, define who you mean by U.S. power. Who has the power? What do you mean? And I guarantee you that when you dive into that question, it is the national security state. It's not the American public. It's not Congress. It's not the White House. It's not the judiciary branch. It is the national security state.
Inviting our enemies to attack us.
When you hear from the European Union's top diplomat and say this just can't happen, it can't be, depending on the president, what the United States' policy is when they've had a longstanding policy. I mean, what is Europe doing right now? You talked about Poland, which is right there, having people coming over from Ukraine right on the border. What do you think that the allies are talking about right now as they listen to some of this language from Donald Trump?
Sure. I mean, I don't have to speculate. My brother attended dinner with that gentleman mid last week and relayed to me that, you know, they're still trying to measure what the future holds, whether it's going to be a Trump administration that, again, spells disaster for the Euro-Atlantic alliance, will destroy NATO, or do we have a 4 more years of President Biden rebuilding relationships, making America stronger, driving the most powerful, fastest growing large economy in the world? That's what they need to, that's what they're trying to measure. And I think the comment that he had, my twin had, was that they need to plan for the worst. And
fastest growing economy, when you have many American people that are complaining about the price of their eggs and their milk, what planet are you on, dude?
the best, which is we do have a massive amount of chaos by a Republican Party. It's not just Trump, but it's a Republican Party as a whole that's catering to Trump's most excessive, most destructive tendencies. I mean, they themselves they passed legislation to prevent Trump from unilaterally withdrawing from NATO, but that's not enough. The amount of damage that Trump
Congress, aka run by Democrats and wannabe Democrats, are trying to neuter the executive branch. And we need leaders that start asking questions about the premise of how we continue to make bad decisions. And that means restructuring the national security state, abolishing it, destroying it. But it being same old is not acceptable anymore.
Administration can do is really hard to fathom.
Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Bannon with a very direct warning there. Thank you so much for coming up here. I appreciate your time.
A deep thinker. Yeah. Okay, Colonel. All right, Colonel. We're going to go to DW now to get an international affairs perspective.
It's right.
Before we do that, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and sign up for the pulmonology lectures that I have done for $50. All right. You can sign, you go to my store, click classes and pulmonology, and for $50, you get 22 PDFs. They are each one of them is a slide deck of different concepts within the pulmonary system to learn about how the lungs work, diseases of the lung, how to do a physical examination, different tests, the anatomy of the respiratory system, the embryology of it, different diseases like COPD and pulmonary fibrosis, cystic fibrosis. You'll learn a lot, all right? Each day I release a new video. Each lectured video is tied to a certain slide deck. And then that concept is released for that module. So for $50, you get the whole thing. You get 22 slide decks that you can download, PDFs that you can download, and you'll have access to the video that's tied to that slide deck. I have populated about 10 of them already out of the 22. And each business day, I put up a new lecture dealing with the pulmonary system. I will be doing other modules, such as cardiology and infectious diseases and, other systems like renal, neurology. So you're going to learn a lot. The whole idea is for you to challenge your brain and learn stuff, but also to be a citizen scientist. It's content that is informative, but not too, overly complex and complicated. So someone can learn, and I build it up. I start from ground zero and I build you up so you can learn about different systems of the human body. When you do these modules, after you complete all these modules, you will know a lot about the human body, and you'll be able to read a scientific published paper on medicine and be able to discern for yourself the validity of the argument that's published. What are some of the the positives of the research? What are some of the negatives of the research? You'll be able to be a discerning citizen by being a citizen scientist. See, the problem is that the mainstream media wants you to just listen to what they have to say. They don't want you to think for yourself. And there's many people that aren't very strong in understanding medicine or understanding science. So if you follow along and you listen to the lectures and you study those PowerPoints that I create, those PDFs, you're going to learn a lot. And, I have released this first module, which is the pulmonology module. Please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, links in the description of this video, and purchase the module. You'll have access to the videos and the slide decks. And each day I release a new lecture. And then after all those releases, I will start doing another module. Most likely it'll be infectious diseases. So please go to the store and get the module, learn about medicine so you can be a citizen scientist. Instead of, listening to a bunch of people that may be saying something that's correct, maybe not. I want you to make the decision for yourself. All right, so now let's play DW.
Keep it together. Yeah, that is so.
Thanks for speaking to DW. Israel is saying that it's on the brink of mounting a new offensive against Rafah, the town at the very bottom of the Gaza Strip. Over 1 million Gazans have sought refuge there. There are fears that there could be another wave of casualties. If we look at Germany and the United States, really Israel's two biggest supporters, are we getting to the point where you think they need to say to Israel, enough is enough?
Well, the German Foreign Minister has already said it's held, and I think this must not happen. The protection of civilians is key. So many thousands of children have already been killed, and there is apparently no end in sight. So I really hope that Netanyahu reconsiders, that he does what 150 countries and more asked in the United Nations and finally agree to a ceasefire.
And yet that message is evidently not getting through from Germany or the United States to Netanyahu.
Well, it's for the politicians to see what instruments do they have so that their appeal is actually heard. We have seen President Biden, we have seen Tony Blinken ask Netanyahu to stop and have a ceasefire to allow for more help to come in. And we'll see in a short time when the Israeli government has to deliver a report to the International Court of Justice what it does to prevent genocide. And we need to stop of this killing.
Do you believe that there is any evidence that the genocide could be taking place or a risk of taking place?
Well, this is what the International Court has said by accepting the South African request, and it has said there is a danger of genocide, and to prevent this, it asked certain measures to be taken. And
the last time I looked, South Africa is having a racial war between blacks and whites, And it's not whites going against blacks, it's blacks going against whites.
This will now have to be delivered to the court, and we'll see what Israel does to prevent a genocide.
Now, all of this means that Germany, the United States, and also other Western supporters of Israel find themselves accused of caring more, say, about Ukrainian civilians than about Palestinian civilians. By the sound of what you're saying, it sounds like you can understand where that criticism is coming from.
Well, we hear this. As I said, there are 150 countries who urgently ask for a ceasefire. This is a majority of nations. And I think this is something that the international community asked for. And I think this is what should be asked the Israeli government.
It's a battle between Jacob and Esau. Let them fight it out. The international community is irrelevant. In this case, not all cases. If you notice the way I am, it's not that I'm against all war. You know, there's some people that are pacifists and they don't want any war. No, that's the wrong way. And there's others like John Bolton that wants war everywhere. That's the wrong way too. Some wars have to be fought. Some wars should not be fought. The problem that's going on in Europe should not be fought. And that is a brewing problem because of our national security state. In terms of the Middle East, this thing is biblical. This ain't international community, where the international community is a modern construct. We're talking about something that is extremely of higher intelligence. That's way beyond anything in the desires of an international community. It's something very deep between the house of Jacob and the house of Esau, and the battling of those twins, and the rebooting of the temple. All right, and there's different commentary on how it gets rebooted, but it sure as hell ain't Esau. It sure as hell ain't Esau that's doing the rebooting. It's Jacob. All right, that's very clear. All right, so you know the bottom line is this. You know, maybe Israel has to do what the Crusades couldn't get done, and is take down that dome of the rock. So I take the stance that the international community is actually irrelevant when you're talking about a very Kabbalistic battle between Jacob and Esau. Now, in terms, so that's a war that should be fought. And I'm on the side of Jacob, all right? Very clear on that. Now, when it comes to the conflict in Asia, the United States is going to be much, much weaker if China controls that region. But to fight China, America will lose its hegemonic power also, but not as great. So it's really almost a no-win situation for the United States. If they don't fight and win, the hegemonic power is in that region will be almost zero. And the weakening of America will be far greater than winning a war, even though the hegemonic power and the prowess of the quote empire of the United States will be diminished. So it's really a no-win situation. It's just a less win situation. Now, philosophically, if you let China win, then that means that a communistic, slight capitalistic society will start to take hold around the world, because other governments are going to say that model is the winning model, and therefore we're going to try to duplicate it. If you think I'm wrong on this, just take a look at what was going on in the Western world, you know, European nations, and even in the United States during the 1920s, when people were financially strapped with the Great Depression. There was a strong group that was starting to emerge that wanted to destroy capitalism. Same thing's going to happen if China wins. So that's a war that needs to be fought. One, to save our constitutional freedoms, even though hegemonically we are going to lose greatly. But we'll lose more our constitutional freedoms and our hegemonic power if China wins. So there's really not going to be a true winner in this conflict in Asia, like what happened in World War II. The United States is going to be a failed empire. The question is how failed? Really failed or halfway failed?
To actually implement.
Now, the other major conflict not far from here that's raging in Europe, of course, Russia's war against Ukraine, which has been grinding on for so long. We see a certain amount of jitters in the West here. We see the American military support could be close to the brink of collapse. We saw Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, was just in Washington. He warned that Ukraine is absolutely dependent on that support. The strong implication being that if that support falls away, then Ukraine loses. Is that the situation we're looking at?
Well, the jury's still out. I think that the US president, the US government is pushing for the continuation of delivery of weapons to Ukraine. We just saw that in the Senate. There was a 2/3 majority in favor of it. And I just can't believe that US parliamentarians will let Ukraine down and will Vladimir Putin strike a victory. So I don't believe that. On the other hand, what I must say, there's always something positive even in the worst developments. And this is a European awakening. We see very clear the German Chancellor is assuming a leading role in Europe for the support of Ukraine. He is really drumming support from his European partners to do more. I think we'll see a drive now for more European defense, for the European Union to assume more responsibility. And this is what we need in general. We need the European Union, the European countries, the European members of NATO to assume more responsibility for European security, because no matter who will be the next US president, it's clear that the US will have to concentrate on their domestic challenges and they will concentrate on Asia, and therefore Europe has to do its homework.
Yeah, and of course, you're talking about the elephant in the room causing a lot of angst here in Europe, a possible second Trump administration. Of the weekend, Donald Trump was saying that he would even encourage Vladimir Putin to attack NATO members that he feels are not paying their dues. What does Europe need to do in that regard? Because Europe is totally dependent on American nuclear weapons.
Well, there are several questions. But first of all, that may surprise you, but Donald Trump has a point. The European members of NATO, all member states of NATO, have committed 10 years ago to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. And many countries, including my own, have not delivered. They have only now finally, with a special effort, reached these 2%. And it will be key that Germany and other partners continue to do that, not to do a favor to President Trump, but to secure European protection, to strengthen the European part of NATO. With regard to European cooperation, with regard to the nuclear umbrella, of course we rely on the US. But at the same time, I think it would be safe for Germany, for the other European NATO partners to actually pick up what the French president has offered, to have a discussion about the force de frappe, about the nuclear French forces, and we should add Great Britain to that discussion and see how much are we ready to have as a complementary shield a European.
We wouldn't have this nuclear problem if we integrated Russia with NATO when they asked. Let me do a quick commercial for PNN, because where else are you going to get the unvarnished news with a potty mouth? Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the anti-aging boxes that I offer. You can also buy the products individually, but I've curated these different anti-aging boxes, and I've created 2 boxes. They're called anti-Fauci boxes. All right. There's the beginners and there's the advanced. What's in the beginners? The beginners box has max 35, which is 35 ppm to structural nano silver liquid. You take a teaspoon of it a day. If you're not feeling well, take 2 tablespoons. You get D3, which helps to get rid of infected cells through apoptosis. And D3 is needed for calcium absorption, and it helps with gene expression. So make sure you get your D3. And part of the protocol is to bring down inflammation. You bring down inflammation by taking turmeric, which also is an antioxidant, and taking ashwagandha root, which helps to control the blood glucose levels. By bringing down those pro-inflammatory cytokines, you're going to be less inflamed and your body's going to heal. And in this box, there's also the magnesium and zinc will help to boost up your immune system. So the whole, that right there is the beginner's box. Then you can get the advanced box where you can pick either C62 ounce coconut or C62 ounce avocado. All right. Why do you get C60? It is a very, very strong antioxidant. It will neutralize free radicals, help the cellular health, and improve the mitochondrial health and boost up your ATP. This, when you do all this, you're going to start seeing an improvement in your health. Your immune system is going to get better. You're going to have more energy, and you're neutralizing pathogens and bringing down inflammation. All right. So I have called this the anti-Fauci box, beginners or the advanced. The beginners box is at 200 and the advanced box is at 260. You get a lot of high quality supplements in either of the boxes. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get an anti-Fauci beginners box or an anti-Fauci advanced box. It'll boost up your immune system, neutralize pathogens, bring down inflammation, bring down free radicals. And when you do this on a regular basis, you're going to actually see your health improving, and you're going to start seeing that your body is aging slower compared to a group that's not doing this. So go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. So back to the news.
Protection by those Europeans who have at their disposal their own nuclear forces.
Now, at the same time, on Ukraine, you've been saying that it's really time to be thinking about the form of negotiations that could happen at the end of this conflict, whenever this conflict does come to an end, a ceasefire and a negotiating process. What could that involve? How do you envisage that?
Well, when you look at conflicts worldwide, most have not only ended, but they have ended with some kind of agreement. And therefore, I think we have to look at it. It could be something like the Minsk agreement, which is not favorably looked at, but I think it's not favorably looked at not because of its content, because the content is pretty normal. You ask for a ceasefire, you ask for withdrawal of heavy weapons, you have an observer troop, you have a political perspective on this. The criticism that is at Minsk and other agreements is that Russia just tears these kind of agreements apart when it suits the president. And therefore, what is key for any agreement that we could enter and could have in the end, there have to be guarantees. There have to be security guarantees that Vladimir Putin knows he has to pay a price if he again tears up an agreement. And from my perspective, the best would be for Ukraine to join NATO, the strongest military alliance.
And do you imagine that as being part of a deal where then Ukraine does cede some territory to Russia? So Russia keeps the Donbass, the rest of Ukraine goes into NATO, for instance?
I think it's a very bad idea.
Can anyone listen to the Tucker interview that actually is making policy? That is a non-starter nuclear war button push. Russia does not want NATO at its front door. Amazing, amazing. This is what I'm saying. The national security state they want war. They'll blame it on somebody else, but they want war, destruction. Now, maybe that's the way that they're going to maintain the prowess of the American dollar, destroy everyone where they have to use American dollars. Maybe that's the game plan. I don't know. It's plausible. Crazy, crazy. Ukraine should never get into NATO. NATO should be truncated. The United States should fund much less of it. And if it does exist, there's some sort of normalization that will take place between the Western powers and Russia. Russia should be integrated into NATO. Think about it. What Putin wanted to do with Clinton, all right? When he asked him about being integrated into NATO, we would never have this problem if the United States did what Putin asked. We would not have this problem. And most likely the coup in 2014 in Ukraine wouldn't have happened either. But we keep on poking the bear. While the CIA's listen to Ted Nugent. And they have it on their earphones, Fred Bear, hunting the bear. I tell you, it's crazy.
Think about ceding territory. This means that by force you change borders in Europe, and I think that cannot be part of any agreement. No, it's what kind of agreement we have in the end. We have to see. The Ukrainians have to decide for this. Could this be something temporary, as it was foreseen for the Donbass in the 2015 Minsk agreement? This is for the Ukrainians to decide how they want to play it. But again, to change borders in Europe by force would set a horrible precedent. I think shouldn't be. Key is security, key is guarantees, so that Putin knows this is where the buck stops.
Yeah, and it's clear in your own report that Ukrainians don't want to give up any territory, and that is, of course, highly understandable. But the Minsk agreement, it just froze the conflict. And isn't this the concern?
Well, you have to understand this is only part of it. When Minsk was concluded, there was Russia was attacking. President Poroshenko told Chancellor Merkel he needs to have a ceasefire, because otherwise the Russian troops at the time could march all the way to Minsk, to Kiev.
So there's some breaking news that's going on with Ukraine and Russia. I guess Russia's ship got sunk by some sort of drone attack. I have about 3 minutes left on this video, and then we'll go to covering that issue. This is PNN.
Minsk about was a ceasefire, which by the way, the Russians didn't really observe, but it did have this political perspective that, after a certain, autonomy that would have been granted to the Donbass, there would be a kind of a reunification, and Ukraine would again have the sovereignty over this territory. So I think the agreement was a good one. The problem was the implementation, that Russia, Vladimir Putin, was not ready to implement it.
But just a final question. I mean, you suggest that there could be an agreement where Russia withdraws all of its troops and Ukraine also joins NATO. For Russia to go along with something like that, they would probably need to be under much greater military pressure than they are now, wouldn't they?
Well, this is why we have to see that Ukraine continues to be armed with all arms that are at our disposal, because after all, they defend our freedom. It's the Ukrainians, but also ours, because
This
Vladimir Putin
strategy
has said,
is a colossal fuck up. Shit.
publicly that he wouldn't stop there. So we have to do we have to support for Vladimir Putin. He has to understand that he cannot gain by prolonging this war, that he cannot win this war. And you can see that while he gives the appearance of being the strong man who has everything under control, that there are the first effects of and strong effects of sanctions. Their fleet of airplanes from Airbus and Boeing is grounded. You could see that he lost faith last week when he had to stop one of the candidates that whom nobody knew before was running for president on a ticket that was against the war. And he was scared that all of a sudden the momentum this person created was enormous, so that he had to stop that. This shows a sign of weakness. So we have to continue to push him into this. One of the things that's very important, by the way, is, and we try to do this also in the Munich Security Conference, that we have to talk to those countries that don't implement sanctions, to think about this, to think about if it wouldn't suit their interests better if an aggressor like Russia would be put into its place to stop similar things from happening in other parts of the world.
So lots to look out for at the Munich Security Conference. Thank you very much, Christopher.
Thank you very much for your questions.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to this Russian ship that was sunk. Of course, there's a
folks
commercial.
If we're going to win re-election, I need you by my side from the very start. Whatever you're able to chip in, even if it's just a buck or two.
First, though, Ukraine's military says it's destroyed a Russian warship that was in its territorial waters off the Black Sea, off occupied Crimea. The military said on social media that the Cesar Kunikov, a large landing ship pictured here, was near the resort town of Alupka when it was hit. Let's speak to our Ukraine correspondent, James Waterhouse. Do we have any more details about this?
Well, we've seen footage put out by Ukraine's military appearing to show a column of smoke on the horizon looking out to the Black Sea from occupied Crimea, and colleagues have verified that it is indeed, appears to be the Cesar Kunikov, this landing ship. It's the second type of vessel in almost as many months that has been destroyed by Ukrainian forces, it appears. We've yet to hear anything from the Russian installed authorities there. They're instead reporting several Ukrainian drone strikes further afield. But what this means, we are talking about a landing ship that can carry several hundred tons of cargo, hundreds of personnel, and up to a dozen armored vehicles. It is the most efficient way for Russian forces to move men and equipment for its southern war effort off the Ukrainian coast. And we make this the 24th Russian vessel that has been damaged or destroyed by Ukraine, which barely has a navy. It's lost control of most of its coastline, and yet it has used these marine-type drones that travel over water. They're packed.
Do you really think the Ukrainians are doing this? Or do you think they're getting the help from special forces?
Explosives or cruise missiles to great effect, which has severely damaged Russia's navy in this area, undermined its presence to the extent that Ukraine can now establish its own trading route for grain once more, and it's lessened Russian missile strikes from the Black Sea itself. And Russia's ability.
Now, the reason why you listen to my channel is because I interrupt so many times, but I give you gold nuggets of knowledge. What can we learn from this? The US Navy, we don't have enough warships. And on top of it, the ships that we do have that are modern are over-teched. So there's a lot of chance for technical difficulties with these ships. If we went to war with China, we would have a similar problem if we started losing ships. We have gutted our Navy. Why? Because we sent fucking military equipment and money to Ukraine and wasted trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So if Russia, fighting relatively a weak country like Ukraine, even though we have G.I. Joe in Ukraine helping, Russia's starting to see some stress in their Navy. Just expand that. When China and the United States fights each other. Now you start seeing the problems that will start to arise for the Americans. And you can thank the Democratic Party for fucking this up. Oh, and don't forget the national security state.
To repair these vessels or replace them completely, it really is questionable, given how Ukraine has reasserted itself on the Black Sea. So this will be welcome good news, because further north across the vast front line, it is a bit of a different story, where you have Ukrainian generals seriously considering tactical retreats in some areas as Russian ground forces continue to launch wave after wave of attack. But what we are seeing is the Russian Navy continuing to be frustrated by Ukraine, which only has a handful of ships itself.
And you all have had this report today that the Kremlin has denied on Wednesday, denied a Reuters report that the Russian President Vladimir Putin had proposed a ceasefire in Ukraine to the US via intermediaries. What do you make of all that?
I think this is nothing surprising. I think Vladimir Putin, if you look at his recent interview with Tucker Carlson, where he sort of announced, repeated, unchallenged, his rationale for this war, he said he would be open for negotiations on his terms. I think, Vladimir Putin is still looking to take as much of Ukraine as possible, and he's also looking to consolidate what he has taken over the past 10 years in his campaign of aggression against Ukraine. I think the idea of there being any kind of negotiation on Russia's side would come when Ukraine was under enough pressure from its own allies, or that he was able to kind of present something tied in a ribbon as some kind of a win the territory has taken so far. I think we are still yet to reach that point, but the point Ukraine keeps making is that the idea of any ceasefire, concession, or anything like that in terms of territory won't stop there for Russia. Ukraine is already having to balance its economic priorities. President Zelensky is having to make political considerations when he mobilizes men in his population, whereas Russia can remain on a war footing under Vladimir Putin. It can continue to mobilize hundreds of thousands more soldiers. It can manufacture more equipment, more missiles, which it continues to launch against Ukraine. And let's be clear, Vladimir Putin's overall goal, his dream, his prize is here, Kiev, as well as the whole of Ukraine. And I can't see that changing anytime soon.
James Waterhouse, thank you very much indeed.
Yes, indeed. All right, we're going to Times Radio. Same issue.
Reports overnight that the Ukrainians have destroyed a Russian warship. They're chipping away at the Black Sea Fleet. This just shows that there is some progress being made. It's not spectacular progress. It's not like it was in autumn 2023, so autumn 2022, when the Russians suffered a real reverse at the hands of the Ukrainians. Last year, the counteroffensive was difficult and didn't make much progress. But it's really, really important that we in the West go on supporting Ukraine for our own protection and to minimize Putin having thoughts of further aggression against Western Europe.
Now, how close are we to war with Russia? Is it around the corner? But with tensions heightened, 90,000 NATO troops will be taking part in the biggest military exercise since the Cold War, named Steadfast Defender. The International Institute for Strategic Studies lost 3,000 tanks since the beginning of its invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. And just this morning, the Russian warship, the Caesar Kunikov, was destroyed. So let's talk to Lord Bannon, former Chief of the General Staff, the head of the British Army. Lord Bannon, welcome back to the programme. First of all, I mean, we've had these rumblings. I had my, as I said to listeners the other day, I had my 18-year-old talking to me about conscription the other day, which came as a bit of a blow. How prepared is NATO and the UK realistically for war with Russia? Should we be?
Well, Mariella, good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction. I was listening to your previous piece, and I wasn't quite sure what our topic of conversation was going to be.
Don't worry, I'll come around to love in a minute.
Well, it comes down to war and peace, shall we? No, I think you raised a very important point. You ask how prepared we are. I think what exercise Steadfast Defender is doing is trying to demonstrate to would-be aggressors, and let's face it, we'll just talk about Russia here, that NATO is capable of putting together a large exercise, and this is part of our deterrence against future aggression. And of course, this is what it's really all about. And there is a price to deterrence as well.
What about not expanding NATO as a deterrence? No, we wouldn't want to do that. No. National security state doesn't want that. No. Too much money to be made. You know, look at all that oil that Russia has.
Well, we've been commenting in this country that, yes, all right, we're above the NATO spending limit of 2%. We're probably at about 2.3%. But frankly, that is insufficient to buy us the degree of deterrence that we probably need in 2024 against a Russia that's not just proven to be a threat, but actually is a positive aggressor. So exercise Steadfast Defender is important as an exercise in deterrent and to show Russia that NATO is capable of putting a large force into the field.
At the same time as this big operation is going on, as you say, partly at least, in order to show relevant people, should we say, I presume Vladimir Putin in this instance, the sort of strength that NATO has, you've got the potential future president of America saying that if countries don't fork out, then Russia should be free to do what they want with them. That's surely a very unhelpful intervention at this moment in global politics.
Yes, I would agree with that. I mean, I think we all know quite a lot about Donald Trump, and when he was president previously, he was pretty aggressive towards NATO member states who did not pay their way, pay up to the minimum of 2% of GDP.
But that's because George Bush Jr., Clinton, Barack Obama let the Euro whiners do whatever they want. And finally, a tough guy ended up in the White House to tell the Euro whiners it's time to pay up.
Not surprisingly, he's back on that theme again. I think where he, in my view, lets himself down is by taking this to a rather ridiculous level of saying, well, if you don't pay, you're delinquent, and frankly, aggressors can do what they like with you. Now, you could say, on the one hand, he's overstating the case to get people to react. On the other hand, you could say, goodness, is this really the language of someone who wants to be president of the United States? I didn't like that language at all. Yeah.
Well, what kind of language would you like? Professor, what kind of language would you like? Would you like a president to just say, please, could you please pay your bill, Germany, please? Oh, don't worry about it. We'll spend more money, please.
We're paying the minimum of 2% towards our collective defence. And I think in the current international circumstances, we should be paying significantly more above that. In this country, 2.5% rising to 3% would be the right sort of thing. And just bear in mind, in the days of the old Cold War, we were paying about 5% of GDP on defence, and that did prevent the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact from attacking. So that's the price of deterrence. And goodness, if you think deterrence is expensive, fighting a war is horrific.
The Russian ambassador has been doing the news rounds this morning and been quite bellicose, and maybe as a result, precipitated in a way by this NATO operation, but saying that Russia is more than capable of the challenge of supplying its war effort, and basically they're going to win. Do you see this as rhetoric, or do you think that we are at a difficult point in terms of the balance, in terms of what can be achieved, unless the West perhaps increases its support for Ukraine, and are we back looking at things like no-fly zones?
Well, the Russian ambassador in London would say this sort of thing. It's after all, any ambassador anywhere in the world is going to be the mouthpiece of their own government or their own leader. And let's face it, Putin is putting his own version of Russian history, his own version of what's going on in Ukraine out for people's consumption. And he's spun the war in Ukraine as frankly Russia defending itself against Western aggression, which, as we all know, is 180 degrees from the truth. But what is really, really important, and continues to be important, is that Ukraine does succeed. And it's absolutely incumbent on European countries, the United Kingdom included, and of course the United States as well, to go on supporting Ukraine. The war is in a difficult position at the present moment. It is in something of a stalemate on land, but reports overnight that the Ukrainians have destroyed a Russian warship. They're chipping away at the Black Sea Fleet. This just shows that there is some progress being made. It's not spectacular progress. It's not like it was in autumn 2023, autumn 2022, where the Russians suffered a real reverse at the hands of the Ukrainians. Last year, the counteroffensive was difficult and didn't make much progress. But it's really, really important that we in the West go on supporting Ukraine for our own protection and to minimize Putin having thoughts of further aggression against Western Europe.
And on the subject of our own protection, just finally, I think we've got something like 144,000 combat troops here in the UK. To my son's point about conscription, what sort of target should we be aiming at? I mean, is that anything like enough?
Well, that 144,000 figure includes all the regular elements of the Army, Navy, Royal Air Force and Royal Marines. So break it down, actually it shows you that the Navy and the Royal Air Force and the Royal Marines are really quite small. And actually the Army is the smallest it's been in modern times, at around about 73,000, 74,000. The point about conscription, and this has been a slightly overblown discussion over the last couple of weeks, is the history of the First and Second World War shows us that when war breaks out, we deploy our small, well-trained regular army, and it invariably gets destroyed in the first few weeks and months. And the war then has to be conducted by a citizen army that is recruited and trained and then wins the war. And the question that people like General Patrick Sanders were posing was, have we got the mindset, have we got the thinking that actually if we did get into another hot war, we would have to start thinking about calling out lots of people, conscripting lots of people to be the second echelon, the second phase army to bring us ultimate success, as happened in the First and the Second World Wars. It's quite theoretical, it's quite hypothetical at the present moment, but it's an interesting and salutary conversation for us to have had.
Lord Dannatt, very grateful to you for joining me today. I'll ask you about love next time you're on. I don't want to disappoint you. Happy Valentine's Day. That was Lord Dannatt, former Chief of the General Staff.
I mean, wouldn't Ukraine, send their Valentine's gift to Russia by sinking one of their warships? Yeah. It really sounds like something that was Special Forces. Let's do DW here and on this issue.
I saw this online and I didn't believe it at first, but I decided to give it a try because I wanted something for my vehicle for emergencies. And to be honest,
Ukraine's military says it has destroyed another Russian warship in the Black Sea. It says the vessel sank near Alupka, a city on the Crimean Peninsula, which Moscow illegally annexed 10 years ago. Kyiv says it used naval drones to sink the Caesar Kunikov, a large landing ship, saying it was in Ukrainian territorial waters at the time. This is the second time in 2 weeks that Ukrainian forces have claimed to have sunk a Russian vessel in the Black Sea. DW's Nick Connolly has more details from the Ukrainian authorities.
Well, we've seen some video which they say shows these naval drones attacking this big landing ship off the coast of Crimea, as you mentioned there. It wasn't in port, it was kind of the south coast of the Crimean Peninsula. We also know that this is a ship that had already been damaged back in the early phase of the war when it had been in the Russian-occupied port of Berdiansk. At that time, it had survived, unlike another ship that was in port next to it and had been rebuilt, had been made seaworthy again. That now seemingly no longer possible. We understand from these Ukrainian sources that basically a large hole was going on its left side, and that has led to it taking on water and being beyond recovery. As for the rescue operation, we don't have any details now if those Russian sailors have been evacuated from that ship or not, but it's definitely a reminder that basically nowhere in these Russian-occupied waters off Ukraine is safe for the Russians right now. We've had more than 10 ships destroyed and many more damaged, and we're really seeing the Russians under pressure there.
Let's bring in military analyst Mike Martin from the War Studies Department at King's College London. Mike, good to see you again. Now, if indeed confirmed, how big a blow would the sinking of this warship be to Russia's military might in the Black Sea?
In and of itself, it's not a huge blow, it's a landing ship. But I think, as Nick, your correspondent, just said, this has to be seen within the context of a number of ships sunk by Ukraine. And this is the second ship sunk this month by Ukraine.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has called this a great victory for Ukraine. Let's look at the other side of things then. Why is this such a crucial achievement for Kyiv?
Well, in 2014, the Russians captured most of the Ukrainian navy. And so Ukraine basically does not have a navy yet. It's managed to sink 17,000 tons of Russian shipping, which is 50% more shipping than Russia has managed to sink of Ukraine's. So for a country without a navy to sink 50% more shipping of one of the world's largest navies is really an extraordinary achievement.
Kyiv claims to have destroyed up to a third of the Black Sea fleet, and it really appears that Ukraine finds it easier to put Russia on the back foot in the Black Sea than on the battlefield on dry land. But what do you think is a reason for that?
Well, the reason that over the last year Ukraine has really slowed down on the battlefield on land is because Russia had time to dig in very extensive defenses all along the front line. And these are multi-layered, have minefields and so on and so forth, which has made it very, very difficult for Ukraine to make any progress whatsoever. And that, coupled with a lack of things like artillery ammunition, because Western supplies are dropping down, has made it much more difficult for Ukraine to make any progress on land.
And attacks on the Black Sea fleet have been increasing. How come Moscow doesn't seem to see them coming, or at least cannot seem to find a way to prevent strikes?
Well, a lot of these ships are quite old. So, for instance, the landing craft that was just sunk was a Soviet-era ship. And over the last 30, 40 years, there's been a big technological shift. Now, most of these ships are sunk, in fact, all of them, I think, are sunk by Ukrainian unmanned drones, which either skim the surface of the water or just go slightly underneath the surface. Now, a lot of these ships are configured to defend themselves from other ships or from submarines with torpedoes. And so really they're playing catch up on what has been quite a recent advance, a technological advance in naval warfare. And that's why a lot of these ships are going down. And it's very hard for Russia to defend against this new technology.
Yeah, these underwater drones that you just mentioned, they have proven crucial for Ukraine. What can you tell us about how they function, how they're steered, how they're maneuvered?
Well, the most important thing is that they're much cheaper than having your own ship and, torpedoes or guided missiles. And the way they work is a bit like an aerial drone. It is effectively explosives with a propeller and then you can steer them by encrypted radio link. And as you've seen, you're just showing it on the screen there. They've got cameras so you can record the strike, and that then gives you a propaganda value as well. And really, what again these enable you to do is, because they're cheaper, they're more plentiful, so you can launch 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 of these at the same time, and that adds to the difficulties that the Russians are having in intercepting them.
Yeah. So maybe not a huge blow to Russia's military might, but very much an embarrassing moment for the Russian army. How do you expect them to respond?
Oh, the propaganda value is great. I think there's not very much that they can do to respond in the naval domain. What I suspect we're probably going to see tonight is an extra big air raid with, suicide aerial drones over Kyiv or perhaps Odessa or another city. That's generally how the Russians respond against the Ukrainian civilian population when they're not able to mount a military response.
That was a military analyst, Mike Martin. Always great speaking to you. Thank you so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
Well, the US Senate has passed a $95 billion foreign aid package that has.
Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the pulmonology lecture series that I have created for $50. So just go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, click the link in the description of this video and all my videos, and you'll get 22 PDF files, and you will have a video that is tied to that particular slide deck for different concepts about the pulmonary system. Every business day, I put a new video up. So please go to my store and purchase the whole module for $50, and you'll have access to the 22 PDFs and the individual lectures. I've populated about 10 of them already out of the 22, and each day I put a new one up. And then once I'm done doing that class series, then I will upload another class series for you to purchase. It's been very popular for my audience to purchase that module. So please join the crowd and learn about the pulmonary system and the medical significance of many things that are tied to the pulmonary system. This way you can be a citizen scientist. This way you can be more discerning when you hear things in the news, and you'll be able to read research papers and be more discerning about the validity of the actual publication. Thank you for listening to this episode of The New Yorker, and have a nice day.